Hi everybody, hope you're doing marvellously well. I am about to interview a good friend of mine, Mr. Kristian Kohle. Kristian Kohle is a very successful German metal producer. I would humbly consider him to be an expert on guitar metal tone. He's done tons of really cool videos, not just on amps, but on miking techniques, speakers, you name it. So if I want to know about metal guitar tone, who else am I going to interview but Mr. Kristian Kohle? Mr. Kristian Kohle, how are you?
I'm happy to be here, and to be honest, I'm always happy when we talk, Warren, so I'm good.
Fantastic. It's a lot of fun. Is it beer 30 there?
Kind of, yeah. But don't tell anybody. I'm actually drinking a Klausthaler, which is an alcohol-free beer. It's just between you and me, okay?
Oh, okay, good. We don't want to, break with tradition here.
No, of course not. Of course, beer is important.
Especially if you're German. Yeah. So this is a really interesting video for me because I'm looking at your top 10 and I recognize a handful of the amps. And so for me, it's like, what makes a metal amp is a big question for me because I think that perception for a guy like me is that a metal amp is just kind of, plug it in and the whole world explodes,
Right. Yeah, it should be like that. I think like there are two answers here. So like in general, I think one thing that makes a metal amp is rather functional, and that is that metal guitarists very often need like really different distinct tones, like a real clean channel, then a rhythm guitar tone, highly distorted, then a solo tone or something. So metal players were always like switching between different channels, and I think they created the demand for those, multi-channel amps that came on the market in the, late 90s or something. Whereas somebody like you might just be, good with just having one channel, and then you dial in different tones with your volume.
Just turn the volume down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We don't do that. We switch from from a pure, clean, sweet, beautiful tone to a total nightmare or something. That's what we do. So that's one thing. A metal amp needs a lot of different channels. But if we're speaking about just the tone and the sound, I think that metal guitarists have always tried to find that balance between like total distortion, total mayhem, the more the better, and on the other hand, clarity, especially in the bass, because that music got more and more extreme, and there was a need to tame the beast, and that's why those modern metal amps are voiced differently. Especially the bass is a lot tighter, a lot less loose than in traditional rock and roll amplifiers. Then there's a lot more gain in the preamp and a lot less gain, you have a cleaner power amp with a lot more headroom, which is again very different from classic rock amps or something. So that's the thing about metal, you want a lot of distortion, but you're looking for clarity, because you're playing fast stuff and palm mutes all the time. And that's what those modern metal machines do pretty well.
So good, a couple more questions before we get stuck in. So a big question is how important is the amp in the chain?
Well, I would say it goes like this. The cabinet is the most important part because it really defines the whole frequency range of your guitar tone. And switching from one cabinet to another will, turn things upside down, inside out. That can change everything. And then comes the amp, which is also very important because it defines the distortion, the type of distortion, how tight it is, how loose it is, how fuzzy it might be, all those parameters that define distortion. And then comes the guitar. I'm always saying, people don't like to hear that, but if you have a decent guitar with a good bridge humbucker, you can do metal. Using a Telecaster or a single coil or something is a different story, but I even did a video about this, the difference between an EMG equipped guitar, active pickups, and an SG with classic Gibson pickups is very small. So it's not the guitar, it is partly the amp and it's mostly the cab.
Wow.
That's what I think.
That probably explains why impulse responses are so popular.
Actually, I think that impulse responses have really taught a lot of people, have schooled a lot of people on like the importance of the cab.
All right, Kristian, well, let's get stuck in. And this is, for everybody out there, this is Kristian's top 10 favorite metal amps. However, even though there's 10 of them, he assures us that this is not in any favorite order. These are just 10 amps he loves. So number one.
The first one is a Mesa Boogie dual rectifier. Actually, the old version, the 2-channel version. I have a very old one. I think that is the amp that has been used the most here, like in 20 years of Kohle Studio. Before we start, let me explain the setup. I've got all the amps here, but I'm actually playing a real cabinet next door. Now you can see my live room, and I'm playing a Mesa Boogie 4x12 cab with 2 microphones, an SM57 and a tube mic from SE Electronics, the R&T, which is fattening up the 57. So the rectifier is a brutal sounding amp for several reasons. First of all, it is pretty scooped in the mids. But it has a lot of clean and dynamic low end for a high gain amp. And it has that characteristic high end rattle, that mid bite that makes it so aggressive. And that combination makes it sound rather cold, brutal, and aggressive. The good thing is that it sits really nice in a mix because it leaves a lot of space in the lower mid-range. So yeah, a lot of bands use it, from rock and roll to death metal, because of that. It sounds brutal, but it also leaves space for vocals and other instruments. Great classic amp.
Yeah, we have one here.
Who doesn't?
It's a classic. Yeah, I think it's, you know. Okay, so number two, I wouldn't normally associate, at least in my brain, that Orange were made metal amps. I mean, I think of Orange, I think of watching like 70s rock videos where, you know, guys with huge flares and super long hair and long beards stand in front of Orange amps. And that's always been my view of an Orange amp. I love them. But here you have at number two, you have the Orange Rockerverb.
Yeah, you can see, you know, how much the look of an amp defines the genre in a way. You know, people just don't use it very much for metal. I think the guy from Slipknot used it for a while. That was an exception. But Orange amps, not all of them, but both the Rockerverb and the Thunderverb are fantastic, great metal amps. They are not as fast and not as perhaps responsive as other modern metal machines, or like a 5150 or something like that. But they have a certain creaminess. Is that a cliche word? It is. Creaminess. I said in one of my videos, I said like they sound like, the sound is like marinated in a smoky barbecue sauce or some kind of British sauce. What kind of sauces do you have?
HP sauce or daddy sauce. Or Worcestershire sauce, yeah. Worcester sauce?
That one, I think that one.
Yeah.
And so the distortion feels rather slow, which means it's not the most dynamic amp, but it just responds in a very nice way to your playing. I wouldn't do like a super fast death metal record with it, but anything that needs a little more soul in the tone, that is a little more melodic, is great for Orange amps. And people are very often surprised here how brutal they can actually sound. Great amps.
Let's just switch from the rectifier directly to the Orange, and you will understand what I just talked about. Let's go. Where are all those mids coming from? Listen. Makes you want to play something else, something more complex and harmonic. rich and full of mids. Not that much low end. And rather harmless compared to the Rectifier. But beautiful, right? So it depends on what you want to do. If you want to play something more melodic, something more harmonic, this amp just sings. It sings, you know. If you need brutality, if you want to sound really fucking evil, the Rectifier will do the job. But still, it sounds metal, right? So don't believe you can't use an orange amp for metal. This amp sounds beautiful. Orange Rockerverb.
All right, number 3, another amp that I own, Engl Savage. Engl, pretty much a favorite company of mine outside of the classics like the Marshalls and the Laneys that I grew up with. Engl have just turned out to be some of the coolest freaking people to work with for a start. Their products are amazing. So tell us about, why do you love the Engl Savage?
This is the 60 watt version. Savage 60 is my favorite Engl amp. It sounds brutal. It sounds cold. It sounds great for death metal. But, I don't know, it's even sharper and colder than the Rectifier without that scoop mid-range. And the distortion overall is less dynamic. It's more compressed. It's, I don't know, a German razor blade. Let's switch from the orange to the Engl. Makes me want to play palm mutes. So it kind of has the same brutal vibe, the same aggression like the Rectifier, less dynamic, but it has more mids, you know. So if you don't want that scoop tone, if you want to have more vocal mid-range, if you want to have some lower mids as well, this might be your amp. Great little German amp, Engl Savage 60.
Marvelous. All right, this is really cool. Now, another one, you see, what do I know? Obviously, I don't know diddly squat. I'm totally surprised, and I didn't know, but you've got, on number 4, the Randall RG-200. Randall, to me, when I used to play them, I could never get them to drive hard enough, even for a classic rock sound. So what is special about the RG-200?
Not only that one, but I think this is an exotic amp, of course, because it's no tube amp. It's a transistor amp. And the guy who made it famous was Dimebag from Pantera, who played it. And I mean, everybody knows Pantera's guitar tone, you know, which is also like very cold and it kind of sounds like a pedal distortion. And so that Randall amp, and also a lot of pedals, cheap pedals like the Boss HM2 and the Boss Metal Zone, and all those pedals were used a lot in the 90s especially, and defined a lot of classic metal tones when people couldn't afford anything else, or when they just felt like we need more distortion, and the Marshalls couldn't get them there. So back then, a lot of the early death metal bands and Pantera, they were using pedals or they were using transistor amps to get that kind of distortion, which sounds a little cheaper and not harmonically that rich compared to tube distortion. But for me, it kind of defines a certain tone that I'm in love with, because it's part of my growing up, you know? So that's why I picked this one.
Unfortunately, I don't own that Randall amp anymore, but I was just talking about transistor distortion in general. There have been a lot of pedals and some other amps that went into the same direction. So I'm going to show you something else, and you have to guess what it is. Transistor distortion in general seems to be a little less rich on harmonics compared to tube distortion. That's how I feel. And just listen to this. Sounds very 80s, 90s, right? and it sounds kind of cheap. I mean, it's fast and responsive. But it sounds kind of flat. But again, it triggers, it triggers something, because I was listening to a lot of records that sounded like that when I was younger, because a lot of guitar players were using transistor distortion pedals or Randall amps or Ampeg amps back in the days. So yeah, that's a weak spot, I guess. And if you ask a non-metal guitarist how heavy metal sounds, they will go like, oh, heavy metal, scooped and terrible distortion. That's what they talk about. Terrible transistor distortion. But, for old school stuff, I kind of like it. It's cheap, but I like it.
All right, number 5, we have an appearance of a Marshall, the JCM 2000.
Do you know that
DSL 100. I do. I have a good story. I've got a very good story. Back a few months before that amp came out, I was very, very blessed to be in England and to go and visit Mr. Jeff Beck at his house. And he had the prototype of that. And it's pretty insane. I remember, doesn't it have 3 levels, 3 different channels?
I think it's the DSL has 2, the TSL has 3. That's why there's a D in it.
So it was probably the TSL they played then.
Yeah.
And I just remember it was like pretty amazing experience. It's like, it's got 3 levels of sustain. And it was just like the most Spinal Tap moment of my life. It was awesome.
I think, in the beginning, I talked about like the need for metal amplifiers with a more modern tone, with more voicing options and more channels. And I think that was Marshall's first reaction to that demand. I don't know, was that end of the 90s, early 2000s? I don't remember.
I want to say it was, I think I was there at 99, but I feel like it came out in 2000. I think that was part of the nomenclature, the name 2000.
Yes, we've got a Marshall. And the thing I love about Marshall amps, classic Marshall, is the mids. It's all about the mids. Right? It's not about the distortion really, which isn't tight. It's pretty flubby in a way. And it's not about the low end. It's not about the highs. It's all about the mids. And you can crank the mids on a Marshall amp and they will still sound balanced and in your face. And the cool thing about the JZM series was that they still sound like Marshalls. They still have those JZM 800 mids, but they have more gain and they have some tonal options. If you combine JZM 2000 with, for example, an Engl, or even better, the Mesa Boogie Rectifier on a record, like scooped, modern high gain, and that Marshall thing, and you end up with a million cool combinations and a lot of cool tones from scooped to in your face. Really nice. And yeah, let's check out the tone shift knob, because this is classic Marshall. So this sounds more American to me. Nice. That is a great amp, and if you ask me, that was the perfect combination. Later they came up with that 4-channel amp, and that was just a little overcooked for me, and pretty noisy. So, if you're into Marshall and into modern high gain, check out the JZM 2000 series.
Okay, so next up is an amp I have never heard of. And everybody can laugh at me if this is a really famous amp, but the Brunetti XL Extra Lead. What is that?
It's an Italian boutique company, and they are still in business and doing fine. They just don't do high gain amps anymore, for whatever reason. And for me, that Brunetti, what is it called? The XL, is actually my favorite. I call it like middle of the road amp. So if I just don't know what to do, I pick this one because it's like in between everything, and it always works. It's kind of like the U87 or the AKG C414 of high gain amps, you know, it just always works because it's not too extreme in any direction, you know.
That might sound boring, but it isn't. Actually, there's no real character. The distortion is in between tight and loose. You can push the frequency range to something rather scooped, something rather bright, something rather full. It's pretty flexible, and I don't know, it doesn't have a distinct character that cannot be changed, and that makes the amp kind of flexible. Again, it's not as warm and nice as the Diezel, and not as brutal as the Rectifier, but it's just, you can hear it's just an amp, a boutique amp that is well done. But there's one trick. What I love about this one is that there's a mid switch. Right now it's in the middle position where I think it doesn't do anything. But there's a mid cut. Which makes it more chuggy and brutal. But there's also a mid boost, which boosts around 1K, and it really pushes the guitar into your face. If you don't like your singer, you will love this switch because, you know, it will kick him off stage. Yeah, if you don't like other people, use the Brunetti mid boost. Next amp.
All right, next. This is one that I know very well. My good friend Cameron Webb. This is one of his, if maybe not his favorite amp, and that is the Bogner Überschall.
Which is, yeah, actually a German amp. We do have a lot of German amps here. We have one more or two more coming up. Is that just because I'm German? No, I think Germans actually make pretty decent amps, right?
Absolutely.
I think Reinhold Bogner, yeah, he's a German who went to California, LA, whatever, and yeah, and built, I think, only 2 amps, the Shiva and the Ecstasy, the Shiva and the Überschall. And the Überschall is the high gain amp. It is nothing but amazing, but very expensive. So far I haven't bought one, but I've had it here a few times. I always had the twin jet version, I think, which has only 2 high gain channels and no clean channels, and has the KT88 tubes, which makes it sound even more brutal. And for me, it's going into that dual rectifier direction, like very brutal, huge low end, but just not as scooped. Just a wonderful amp that I need to buy at some point.
All right, next up is, well, you can't get more German than this then, the Diezel D-Moll. And the first time I ever saw one of these was Wes from Limp Bizkit.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, they were working in my old studio doing pre-production for a record for quite a few months, and Terry Date was producing. And I remember walking out, this is 2000, 2001, and I remember walking out into the live room and being, what is this? And that was like 20 years ago.
What a great band and what a great guitar player. And he just came up with some of the most simple but coolest riffs, like stuff like low tuned, really bouncy, great riffs. I love that guy. I didn't know he used to play Diezel, but anyway, yeah, I'm sure he was playing the Diezel Herbert. I think that's their most brutal amp. I kind of prefer the D-Moll because, the Herbert for me is like too close to a dual rectifier, so I don't really need it. Great sounding amp though. Typical example of the modern breed of high gain metal amps, 3 channels, 180 watts power amp, not because you want to play loud, but because you want that power amp to stay clean. because you do all the distortion with the preamp, and a lot of shifting options. There's a mid-cut and stuff like that. So great amp, but I prefer the less brutal sounding D-Moll because it has the most lovely sounding mids in the world. It's just, no matter if you play clean or a crunch or high gain, whatever, those mids always, they just hit you hard and you can't escape them. It has a unique voice. It's just lovely. I love that amp.
Very different character, right? A lot of mids. It's again quite creamy. It's again, not the tightest, not the clearest amp. It really fills a mix. So I use it a lot for lead guitars that need to shine, that need a lot of texture and character in the mids. And I also use it on cleaner or crunchier guitars where you want a lot of mid information and not a scooped metal tone. Anyway, I did a lot of metal records with this one because it's still tight enough. But it always has that wah kind of mid information that none of the others has. If you now go back to the Rectifier, you will understand what I mean. It sings a lot more. Again, not the most brutal amp, but beautiful.
All right, next up is another amp that we have. Not this exact model, but it's the Driftwood Purple Nightmare.
Yeah, a lot of German amps. That's also like a pretty young company, German company. And I just had that amp here for 1 week or something and really fell in love with it. Also one of those modern high gain monsters, very flexible from what I remember. There's also like a few tonal options there. There's an inbuilt noise gate, which is not that important for the studio, but a great feature. And finally, there's an inbuilt tube screamer, because I'm using tube screamers a lot in the studio to tighten the bass even more. And having that inbuilt makes it even, more interesting. Very smart. That amp looks great. You can order it in like different colors and with different front panels and stuff. Like,
I never would have guessed looking at it that it was a metal amp. I mean, I look at it and go, that's a cool amp. It just looks like a versatile amp, and that's the other thing about it. It's incredibly versatile. I mean, I can get some great classic rock tones out of it.
Hand built by one guy from East Germany, really nice guy. He's not paying me. I don't own any of it. I'm just saying he's cool, and the amps sound great. So if you're looking for something special, try the Driftwood. And I think the one that you have even has an inbuilt IR player. Or is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty... it weighs a ton. It's pretty freaking beautiful, though.
Oh, yeah.
Can you see on the back, everybody? Look at that. That's some sexy-looking valves or tubes. And look at those two huge transformers.
Yeah.
And tons of features. Tuner output, sender return, noise gate, impulse response loader here. Looks like it's loaded with... Is that 20 of them? 20 impulse responses. It's got a pad on the back. It's got a USB output. It's got the overall IR volume here. It's got a line out. It's got a ground lift on it. I mean, this dude is really... The bias control is really easy to get to on the back. Yeah. Pretty freaking awesome amp.
Yeah.
All right. Well, last but no means least, a couple of things about this. First of all, it's the VHT Pitbull, which I actually remember. My memory of a VHT is that it's effing loud, like the loudest thing on National Loud Day. Also, to use your word, brutal in the high end. Like,
yes, it was very aggressive. But what impressed me the most was how tight and transparent it sounded. So it has this... I remember checking it out in a guitar store 15 years ago, at least, you know. And it was so hard to play because it sounded so dry. And I loved that, you know, because it was just, there was nothing in between my fingers and the sound in the room. That's how it felt. But it was so hard to play, you know, because it would show all the even the smallest mistakes in your playing. Super dry distortion, gung, 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 extremely loud, and just very special and unique, and nothing like the, let's say, a compressed distortion from Diezel or the compressed distortion from Engl. Very different, very dry, hard to play, but special. The perfect amp to blend with something that is more ballsy and more compressed, you know, just to bring more pick attack and brightness into the overall sound.
So Kristian, that was a lot of fun. I feel like I'm actually educated more in the world of metal amps.
It was great talking to you, and it was actually, I had to make up my mind as well about those amps. You know, sometimes you, even if you know them and use them, talking about the amps is something else, but it was nice.
Thanks ever so much. So everybody, please leave a bunch of comments and questions below. There are also links to Kristian's channel. You can go down here. There'll be links to anything Kristian down there. As I said in the beginning, he has his own drum samples. He has a pedal. Actually, tell us quickly about that pedal because it's pretty phenomenal.
I can show you. Wait a minute. I think it's... So here it is. I hope you can see it. This is the Cleartone Grindstein pedal. It looks amazing. And we have talked about that Boss Heavy Metal 2, that HM2 pedal from the 90s, which is actually a really shitty pedal, but yeah, it defined a certain sound. And this here is a 2-channel pedal where you can actually mix 2 different channels, you know, seamlessly. And the idea is to have that HM2 sound, but you can mix it with a tighter distortion that has a tighter bass and more real high end, and you know, so you can get everything from that HM2 tone to something a lot more modern with just a touch of HM2. So I would say this is the most flexible and coolest ever HM2 pedal on the planet. The Grindstein.
Nice. Are you still selling it?
Yeah.
So there will be a link below if you're interested, and also a link to a video. You have videos on your channel on you using it, of course. Yes. So links to check it out and links to buy if you're interested. Thank you, everybody. Please leave a bunch of comments and questions below. Don't forget to check out Kristian's other YouTube videos. He's insanely talented and a lot of fun to hang out with, as you can tell. Have a marvelous time recording and mixing.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.